The sky over San Francisco was clear, the golden hues of the setting sun reflecting off the Bay Bridge as Daniel stood in his condo overlooking the city. He had always loved the view, but today, it felt different. His fingers gently traced the edge of his coffee mug, lost in thought. Life had been perfect, lately work was thriving. His relationship with Sarah seemed unshakable, and the wedding preparations were coming together smoothly. It was the kind of life that most people dream of, and Daniel felt like he was living it. Sarah had been his everything, his confidant, his partner, the woman he planned to spend the rest of his life with. Their connection had been instant when they met at a mutual friend's birthday party. Sarah, with her radiant smile and infectious laughter, had captivated him from the moment she walked into the room. They had been inseparable ever since, and their love had only deepened over time. The wedding was just 2 weeks away. Daniel had spent countless hours planning every detail, ensuring everything would be perfect. Sarah had helped him with every step, and together, they had crafted what they envisioned as the ideal day. It wasn't just about the ceremony, it was about celebrating their love with the people they cared about the most. But as Daniel stared out at the setting sun, a strange unease settled over him. Something was wrong. He couldn't quite pinpoint it, but he felt it deep in his gut. Maybe it was the stress of the wedding, or maybe it was just the weight of the commitment ahead. But whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. The following evening, Daniel and Sarah had planned a quiet dinner at a local Italian restaurant. It was meant to be a final moment of peace before the whirlwind of the wedding took over their lives. But as the evening unfolded, Daniel began to notice small things that didn't quite add up. Sarah was quieter than usual, her smile didn't seem as bright, and she kept checking her phone under the table. Daniel had known her long enough to recognize that something was off, but he chose not to confront her. It was their last night before the big day, and he didn't want to spoil it with doubts. But the unease gnawed at him, and when they left the restaurant, the tension between them was palpable. As they reached their car, Daniel could no longer hold it in. "Sarah, is something going on?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "What do you mean?" "You're not acting like yourself," Daniel pressed. "You've been distant, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me." For a moment, Sarah didn't speak. Then slowly, she stepped back, her gaze dropping to the ground. "There's something I need to tell you, Daniel." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His heart raced, his chest tightened. He couldn't breathe as he waited for her to continue. "I've been seeing someone else," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't go through with the wedding. I'm sorry." The world seemed to spin around Daniel as he processed her words. His mind refused to comprehend what she had just said. "What? How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice barely audible. "A few months," Sarah admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to get this far, but now it's too late." Daniel stood there, frozen, unable to speak. The woman he had planned to marry, the woman he had trusted with everything, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. And now, just days before their wedding, she was telling him that everything they had built together was a lie. In the days that followed, Daniel's world crumbled. The wedding plans were called off, and he found himself in the midst of a storm he never saw coming. His friends and family were supportive, but their sympathy only made him feel more isolated. He couldn't understand how this had happened. How could his Sarah betray him like this? He spent the next few days alone, locked in his apartment, drowning in anger, confusion, and heartbreak. He couldn't bring himself to look at the wedding invitations or the elaborate plans they had made together. His entire future had been built around the idea of spending it with Sarah, and now he was left with nothing but empty promises. But amid the chaos, Daniel realized something: he couldn't stay trapped in the pain forever. He had to move forward. He had to find a way to heal, to rebuild his life, and find himself again. A week later, Daniel made the decision to leave San Francisco for a while. He needed to escape the city, the memories, the constant reminders of what had happened. He booked a cabin in the mountains of Northern California, far away from everything he had known. The isolation would give him the space to reflect, to think, and to begin the healing process. The first few days were the hardest. Daniel had always been a man of action, someone who thrived in the hustle and bustle of city life. But in the quiet of the cabin, he was forced to confront his emotions. His anger flared up at random moments, followed by waves of sadness that threatened to pull him under. He had been blindsided by the betrayal, and the pain was almost unbearable. But as the days passed, Daniel began to find solace in the peace of the mountains. The silence allowed him to think, to process what had happened. He wasn't ready to forgive Sarah, not yet, but he knew he couldn't let this destroy him. He had to rebuild. just as he had rebuilt his life once before. One morning, after a week in the cabin, Daniel woke up early and went for a long hike in the forest. The cool morning air filled his lungs as he made his way through the trees, each step clearing his mind. The stillness of the forest seemed to calm his soul, and for the first time in days he felt a glimmer of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let Sarah's betrayal define him. He was stronger than that, and no matter how much it hurt, he was going to move forward. The days after the discovery of Sarah's betrayal were a blur of emotions, each one crashing into Daniel like waves against the rocks. He had tried to hold on to the life they had built together, but it slipped through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but the wreckage of broken promises. He had spent the first few days in disbelief, replaying every moment in his mind, trying to find some clue, some sign that he had missed. But there were none. Sarah had been perfect at hiding her secrets, and Daniel had been too blinded by love to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The cabin in the mountains, far from the city and all its reminders, became his refuge. He had been here before, during a brief escape after work, but this time it was different. The peace that had once been comforting now felt suffocating. The isolation felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. But Daniel knew he had to confront the pain, face it head on, if he ever wanted to move on. He spent the first few days in the cabin brooding, reflecting on everything. He avoided thinking about Sarah. The very thought of her made his chest tighten with a mix of rage and sadness. The woman he had loved with all his heart, the woman who had been his best friend, his partner, had lied to him in the most painful way. What hurt more than anything was the way she had gone behind his back, the way she had betrayed his trust and thrown away the future they had both worked so hard to build. The wedding. It was supposed to be their big day, the culmination of everything they had dreamed about. But now it was nothing more than a cruel joke, a reminder of a future that would never come to be. The wedding invites he had written out, the gifts they had bought for their guests. The table-setting everything was left behind in San Francisco, a symbol of his shattered dreams. For the first few days, Daniel focused on nothing but the pain. But soon the physical isolation of the cabin began to take its toll. It wasn't just the emotional solitude, it was the stillness that weighed on him. The quiet was deafening, and all he could hear were his own thoughts. There was no one else to distract him, no city noise to drown out the bitterness that boiled beneath the surface. He needed something to take his mind off the constant ache in his chest. It was on the fourth day that he decided to leave the cabin for a hike. The mountains around him were beautiful towering pine trees, the sound of a distant waterfall, and the fresh, crisp air. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating feelings inside him. He wasn't sure if hiking would help, but he needed to try something, anything, to clear his head. He packed a small bag water, snacks, and a mapan set off early in the morning. The sun had just risen, casting a soft golden glow over the mountain landscape. The trail was steep, but Daniel was used to physical exertion. He had hiked plenty of trails in the past, back when he'd been a part of a life he thought would last forever. But today, this hike felt different. It wasn't about exploring new trails or enjoying the scenery. It was about him. It was about trying to find the person he used to be before Sarah, before everything fell apart. He needed to find himself again, to rebuild what had been broken, not just in his relationship, but in his own sense of self. As Daniel made his way up the trail, his mind wandered. The landscape around him was peaceful, but inside, it felt like a storm was brewing. He was angry. Angry at Sarah for what she had done, but also angry at himself for not seeing the signs, for not trusting his instincts when they had been telling him something wasn't right. He had been too busy focusing on the future, on the perfect wedding, on everything he thought was right. But now, all he had was the wreckage of his idealized vision of love. The further he hiked, the more he realized that the pain he felt wasn't just about Sarah, it was about him. He had lost himself in their relationship. He had built his life around Sarah, around the idea of a perfect future. And now, that vision had crumbled, leaving him adrift. But with each step he took, something in him began to shift. The further he walked, the more he felt the weight of his past slip away, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. But with every step, he began to feel a sense of clarity that had been missing for weeks. The hike wasn't just a physical challenge, it was a mental one. It forced him to confront his pain, to walk through it, and to keep moving forward. Hours passed, and Daniel found himself at the peak of the trail. The view was breathtaking. He could see for miles rolling hills, distant mountains, and the small river winding its way through the valley. He stood there for a long time, taking in the beauty around him, letting the peaceful silence settle into his bones. For the first time since everything fell apart, Daniel felt at peace. He wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but he felt like he was taking the first steps toward it. The pain was still there, a constant ache in his chest, but now it didn't feel like it was going to consume him. He could live with it, learn from it, and use it to grow stronger. As the sun began to set, Daniel made his way back down the trail. The path was familiar now, and he felt a sense of control he hadn't felt in a long time. He had made it through the worst of it. And while he still didn't know what the future held, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this betrayal define him. The next few days passed in a blur of reflection. Daniel spent his time hiking, writing in his journal, and simply being alone. The isolation that had once felt suffocating now felt like a chance to rediscover who he was. But even as he embraced the quiet, Daniel knew it was time to return. He couldn't hide forever. San Francisco, with its busy streets and bustling life, would always be a part of him. It was where he had met Sarah, where he had shared so many dreams and plans. But it was also where his heart had been broken, and he couldn't avoid it anymore. The decision to return was not an easy one. Daniel knew it would be painful to face the city again, to walk down streets that were once filled with promises and memories. But he had to do it. He had to face the past in order to move forward. As he packed his bags and prepared to leave the cabin, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. He had come here broken, uncertain of who he was or what his future held. But now, he was leaving with a clearer sense of purpose. He wasn't the same man who had arrived. He had learned something valuable about himself, that he could survive, even thrive, in the face of pain. And for the first time in weeks, Daniel was ready to face the future, whatever it might bring. The drive back to San Francisco was an exhausting one, but Daniel needed it. He had to face the reality of the life he had built and lost in a place that held so many memories. The sun was setting as he made his way over the Golden Gate Bridge, the vast expanse of the Bay Area stretching out beneath him. The city seemed to glimmer in the fading light, and for a brief moment, Daniel wondered how much of it had really been his. Was it the city he loved, or had it merely been the backdrop to his life with Sarah? It was hard to know what was real anymore. His whole world had been upended in the span of a few days, and now, here he was, returning to the place where everything had started to fall apart. The apartment, the one Sarah and he had picked out together, was a few blocks away from the cafe where they had met for the first time. He had always loved that apartment. It was modern, spacious, with a beautiful view of the city skyline. It was supposed to be their home, a place where they would share memories, build a future. Instead, it now felt like a tombstone to the dreams they had once shared. He pulled up in front of the building, his stomach tight, his chest constricting. He had always been proud of their home. This was supposed to be the life he had worked for. But now, it felt like a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. As he stepped out of the car, the sounds of the city seemed deafening. People walked by in their usual hurry, taxis honked, and the city carried on as though nothing had happened. How could everything move forward so quickly? It felt like the world should have stopped spinning for him just for a moment to acknowledge the pain he was feeling. Daniel entered the building, heading to the apartment that had once been a sanctuary. The door to their unit opened with a soft click. It still smelled like Sarah's perfume, faint but lingering. The emptiness hit him in waves, each room a reminder of what he had lost. His fingers brushed over the countertops, the furniture, the things that had been carefully arranged for their life together. It all felt foreign now, like someone else's home. He stood in the living room for a long moment, staring at the couch where they had spent countless evenings watching movies, making plans, and laughing. The memories flooded back. The proposal, their trips to Napa, the quiet moments that had made him feel like the luckiest man alive. And now, it was all gone. The sound of his phone buzzing broke his reverie. He picked it up, knowing exactly who it was. His best friend, Jake. Jake had always been there for him through thick and thin. Daniel had been avoiding his calls for days, not wanting to face anyone, least of all Jake. But the message was simple. "Hey man, I know you're back in town. I think we need to talk. Let me know when you're free." Daniel stared at the screen, feeling a wave of guilt wash over him. Jake had been there for every important moment in his life. He had been his wingman at the bachelor party, his drinking buddy, and his confidant. And now, when he needed someone the most, Daniel had kept him at arm's length. He was tired of hiding, of wallowing in self-pity. He needed to face the reality of everything, no matter how painful. "I'm free tomorrow. Let's meet up," Daniel typed, hitting send, before he could think twice. The next day, They met at a small bar in the Mission District, the same place where they had celebrated their college graduation years ago. It had the same worn wooden floors, the same dim lighting that made it feel like time had stood still. Jake was already there when Daniel walked in, sitting at the bar with a beer in front of him. He looked up and gave Daniel a slight nod, a subtle acknowledgement of how much had changed. "Sit down, man," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "You look like hell." Daniel chuckled darkly, sitting beside him. "You're not wrong. It's been a rough few weeks." Jake didn't immediately respond, his eyes scanning Daniel's face as though looking for something. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, more concerned. "I know you're going through a lot right now, but you need to talk about this. You can't keep all this in. You're not okay, and you know it." Daniel let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I know, Jake. I don't even know where to start. It's like my whole life has been turned upside down. Everything I thought was real. It was all a lie. How do I even move on from this?" "You take it one day at a time," Jake said, his voice steady. "And you don't do it alone. I'm here for you, man. I know you don't want to talk about Sarah, but I've been watching you go through this by yourself, and it's eating you alive. It's okay to feel lost, but you can't stay there forever." Daniel's chest tightened at the mention of Sarah's name. He hadn't spoken to her since the night she confessed her affair. That moment had been like a knife to the heart, a betrayal so deep he hadn't been able to find the strength to forgive her. He had hoped that with time the anger would fade, but it hadn't. The pain was still raw, still fresh. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her, Jake," Daniel said, his voice heavy. "She destroyed everything. I trusted her. I thought we were building something real together. How could she do that to me?" Jake took a deep breath, placing his hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I can't tell you what to feel or how to forgive, but I can tell you this. Holding on to that anger, holding on to that resentment, it's only going to destroy you. You're better than that. You're stronger than that." Daniel stared at his beer, the bubbles rising slowly to the surface. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I've lost everything. She was my world, Jake. How do I rebuild from this?" "You start by focusing on you," Jake said, his eyes fixed on Daniel's face. "This isn't about Sarah anymore. It's about you finding your footing again. You've been so focused on your relationship that you lost sight of yourself. Don't let this define you, Daniel. Don't let her actions control your future." Daniel felt a flicker of something inside him, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Jake was right. This wasn't just about Sarah's betrayal. It was about him finding himself again, about reclaiming the life he had once had before everything fell apart. "I don't know where to start," Daniel admitted quietly. "I feel like I'm living in a fog." Jake gave him a wry smile. "The first step is getting out of this fog, my friend. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this on your own." The days following that conversation were pivotal for Daniel. He took Jake's words to heart, realizing that if he wanted to heal, he needed to stop blaming himself and stop letting the betrayal control him. It was time to rebuild his life, not just for Sarah, not just for anyone else, but for himself. He started small, picking up things he had once enjoyed before the weight of his relationship had consumed him. He began running again, something he hadn't done since before he met Sarah. The early morning jogs through the streets of the city reminded him that there was still a world outside of the pain, a world he had once been part of. Daniel also focused on his career again. He had put it on the back burner for months, but now he threw himself into work with a renewed vigor. He found solace in the routine, in the stability of his professional life. Each project he completed brought him one step closer to feeling like himself again. Weeks passed, and while the pain never fully went away, Daniel started to regain his sense of self. He had learned the hard way that the future was never guaranteed, and he would never let it slip away again. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel received a message from Jake. "Are you up for a night out? I know a bar where they serve the best whiskey in the city. Let's get a drink." Daniel smiled. He wasn't healed yet, but he was getting there. And with friends like Jake by his side, he knew he didn't have to go through this alone. The days were getting longer as spring began to show its face in San Francisco. The city was alive with people in the parks, at the cafes, and in the bustling streets. Daniel had come to appreciate the energy around him, though it still felt like a distant hum compared to the chaotic silence of the past few months. Slowly, he was adjusting to this new normal, the one where Sarah no longer played a central role in his life. Jake's friendship had been instrumental in his recovery. Every weekend, they would meet for drinks or catch a movie, and while Daniel had once dreaded socializing, he found that these small outings were a welcome distraction. Jake had been there for him during the darkest moments, and now he was there as Daniel slowly rejoined the world outside the confines of his apartment. The healing process was slow but steady. Daniel had started running again. He took to the streets of the city every morning before the sun rose. It was the only time of day when the city felt calm, and Daniel could clear his head. Running had always been his escape. It allowed him to push everything aside, the betrayal, the anger, the uncertainty, and focus on the simple rhythm of his breath and his feet hitting the pavement. But even with all this progress, there was one thing Daniel couldn't escape: the past. It was a Thursday afternoon when he got the message. It was from Sarah. The text was simple. "Can we talk?" Daniel's heart skipped a beat when he saw the name on his screen. He hadn't heard from her since the day she ended their relationship, the day she revealed her betrayal. He had thought he was ready for this, had convinced himself that he could handle it. But as he stared at the words on the screen, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He had spent weeks trying to bury the feelings she had awakened in him. He had worked so hard to rebuild himself, to focus on his career, his friendships, and his healing. He had managed to compartmentalize his pain, but now it felt like it was all rushing back to the surface. He stared at the text for a few minutes, unsure of what to do. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to pretend she had never sent it. But another part of him, he couldn't deny, wanted answers. He needed to know why. He needed to hear her side, even if it hurt. Maybe then he could finally close this chapter. "Where and when?" Daniel typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. "I'm at our old cafe," she replied almost immediately. "I know it's not easy, but I really want to talk. Please." Daniel stared at the phone for another moment, battling the emotions inside him. The cafe. It was where it had all started. Their first date, the first kiss, their laughter over coffee. The place that had once been a symbol of their love now felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. But he had to go. For closure. For himself. When Daniel walked into the cafe, the familiar bell above the door jingled softly, and for a moment he felt like time had stopped. It was as if nothing had changed, as though he was stepping back into a life that once made sense. The same barista was behind the counter, the same jazz music played softly in the background, and the same scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. But Sarah was sitting at their usual table, and she wasn't the same woman he had once known. She looked up when Daniel walked in, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. She had changed, but so had he. "Daniel," Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke, and she quickly wiped her eyes. "Thank you for coming." Daniel didn't sit down immediately. He stood there for a long moment, just taking her in. The woman who had once been his everything now seemed like a stranger to him. But there was still a lingering connection, something that tethered him to her despite everything that had happened. "I didn't think you'd come," Sarah continued, her voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve it, but I couldn't let you go without saying what I need to say. I owe you that much." Daniel finally sat down, his hands clasped in front of him on the table. His emotions were all over the place: anger, sadness, confusion, but also an unexpected sense of calm. The old part of him, the part that had been so consumed by Sarah, wanted to reach out and comfort her. But that part was gone. "Go ahead," Daniel said, his voice steady, though it felt like he was fighting to keep it that way. "I'm listening." Me. Sarah took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "I've been living with this guilt every day since I ended things. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. I thought I could keep my feelings for him buried, that I could pretend it wasn't happening. But the truth is, I was scared. I was scared of losing you, of losing everything we had built. But I also didn't know how to stop. I made a horrible mistake, and I regret it every day." Daniel felt a familiar knot form in his stomach as he listened. He had expected some explanation, some justification for what she had done. But hearing it from her, seeing the remorse in her eyes, didn't make the pain any less real. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah," Daniel said, his voice tight. "You've already made it clear that you don't want this relationship anymore. You ended things, and I've had to deal with that. I've had to rebuild my life, and it's not easy, but I'm doing it. I don't need you to fix this. I just needed the truth." Sarah reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it on his. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I know I can't undo the hurt I've caused, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I made a horrible choice, and now I have to live with that. But I want you to move on. I want you to have a better life than the one I led you into. You deserve happiness, and I can't give that to you anymore. You have to let go of me." Daniel felt her hand on his, and for a moment, he was back in that place, the place where he still loved her, where he wanted things to work out. But it was a fleeting moment, and as quickly as it came, he pushed it aside. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, Sarah," he said quietly, looking her in the eye. "And honestly, I don't know if I should. But what I do know is this. I need to let you go. I need to let go of everything we had. I can't keep holding on to a version of us that doesn't exist anymore." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she didn't say anything more. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Finally, Daniel stood up, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. "I think this is goodbye," he said, his voice steady but filled with finality. "I wish you well, Sarah. I hope you find what you're looking for. But for me, it's time to move forward." As he walked away, Sarah's quiet sobs followed him out the door, but Daniel didn't turn back. He couldn't. He had finally closed the chapter on Sarah, and though it hurt more than he could have imagined, he knew it was the only way forward. That evening, as Daniel returned to his apartment, he felt a strange sense of relief. The apartment, the city, the memories, they were all part of his past now. He wasn't ready to forget everything, but he was ready to rebuild. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. It was his to shape. Daniel woke up the next morning to the same soft light filtering through his blinds, the familiar hum of the city in the distance. San Francisco felt different now. It wasn't just the fog rolling in from the bay, or the people hustling through their daily routines. It was him. It was the way he saw the city. He wasn't the same person who had left weeks ago broken and uncertain. Today, he felt a sense of resolve that he hadn't known in months. Sarah's message had been the closure he needed, and while the hurt would take time to heal, he was ready to move forward. The past had left its mark on him, but it didn't have to define his future. Over the next few days, Daniel threw himself into his work. He had always been driven, but in the wake of his breakup, he had found himself working long hours to avoid confronting his emotions. But now, there was something different about it. Work was no longer a distraction. It was a chance for him to prove to himself that he still had value, still had something to offer the world. He had always been proud of his career in tech, and as much as he'd allowed Sarah to become a focal point of his life, he knew that his professional life had always been his foundation. It had brought him a sense of fulfillment, and now, it was time to reclaim that. He spent the next few days revisiting old projects, catching up on emails he'd been neglecting, and brainstorming new ideas. His colleagues noticed the change in him too. It was subtle, but it was there. Daniel wasn't the same man he'd been when Sarah walked out of his life. He was focused, engaged, and eager to push the boundaries of his work again. There was a renewed spark in his eyes, a drive to prove that he could still build something meaningful even if it wasn't with Sarah by his side. At lunch, Jake texted him, "Want to grab a bite after work? I'm buying. Let's catch up." Daniel had been spending more time with Jake, and he was grateful for it. Jake had always been there, but now, more than ever, their friendship was a lifeline. He replied quickly, "Sure, sounds good." That evening, they met at a local dive bar near Jake's office. The familiar, worn-in vibe of the place made Daniel feel a sense of comfort that he hadn't realized he missed. The place wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. The food was simple, the drinks cold, and the conversation always flowed effortlessly. It was a small escape from the complexities of life. Jake was already sitting at their usual table when Daniel arrived. As soon as he walked in, Jake grinned and waved him over. "Good to see you, man," Jake said, clapping Daniel on the back. "I'm glad you're getting back to it. How's work?" "It's been a lot," Daniel replied, sitting down. "I'm diving back in, which feels good. I needed that, I think. But it's a lot to juggle right now." Jake nodded knowingly. "I get it. You've been through a hell of a lot, but you're doing the right thing. And hey, I've got your back if you need it." Daniel took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He felt the sincerity in Jake's words, and it comforted him. They had always been able to talk about anything, life, love, or their future. Tonight, he felt like he needed a little bit of both. "I'm trying, man, I really am," Daniel said, his voice quieter now. "But I still don't know where I'm going. Sarah's gone, and I know I can't keep living in the past, but damn it, it still hurts. It's not easy to just let go." Jake took a sip of his beer, watching Daniel closely. "It's not easy, no, but you've got to let yourself feel it, the anger, the sadness, whatever it is. You can't bottle it all up, because that'll eat you alive. You've got to let it out." "I know. I've been trying," Daniel admitted, his eyes downcast. "It's just, I thought we were building something together, you know. I trusted her. I trusted everything she said." "I know, man," Jake said quietly, "and I'm sorry she did that to you. But here's the thing. You're not the man you were before all of this happened. You've grown through it. You've learned something about yourself. And that's the kind of stuff that can build something real, something you'll be proud of. Daniel stared into his glass, the weight of Jake's words settling in. He wasn't sure if he believed it yet, but he could feel a shift inside him, a quiet sense of hope, buried deep beneath the anger and betrayal. Maybe there was something waiting for him on the other side of this. Maybe this was the moment where he began to rebuild, piece by piece. The next few weeks were a blur of progress, small steps forward, and occasional setbacks. Daniel continued to immerse himself in work, but he also made a conscious effort to reconnect with people. He hadn't realized how much he had shut others out until he started making plans with friends, getting out of the apartment, and embracing the world again. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One Saturday, he called up his old college friend, Mark, and invited him out for a hike. Mark was a fellow techie, and had always shared Daniel's passion for the outdoors. The two of them hadn't caught up in years, and Daniel thought a change of scenery could be good for him. "Hey man, you want to hit the trails tomorrow?" Daniel asked on the phone. Mark sounded surprised but pleased. "I'd love that. It's been forever. I'll pick you up at 8? "Sounds good," Daniel agreed, smiling despite himself. It felt good to make plans again, to live in the present instead of constantly looking over his shoulder. The hike was a refreshing change of pace. They spent hours trekking up the trails, talking about old times, discussing the latest tech trends, and exchanging stories about their careers. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he was reconnecting with a part of himself he had lost touch with: his curiosity, his thirst for life. As they reached the summit, Mark turned to him, a grin on his face. "You've been quiet today, man. How's everything really going?" Daniel paused, looking out at the panoramic view of the city below. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the skyline. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. It was a moment of peace, a moment to reflect. He had been avoiding the deeper questions, but now, standing on the top of the world, he couldn't deny the truth anymore. "I'm getting there," Daniel said quietly. "It's not easy. Some days it feels like the pain will never end. But I'm learning. I'm rebuilding, piece by piece." Mark looked at him with understanding. "That's all you can do. Take it one step at a time. You've got a lot of people who care about you, Daniel. Don't forget that." Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could face whatever came his way. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't ready to forget the past that would never forget what he had lost, but he could learn from it. He could use it to shape a better future. For the first time since everything had come crashing down, Daniel felt the possibility of something new on the horizon. It wouldn't be easy. He still had a long way to go, but with each day, he was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who could face the world again. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to start again. The sun was setting over San Francisco as Daniel walked through Golden Gate Park, the colors of the sky painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink. It was a perfect evening calm, serene, and full of possibility. For the first time in months, Daniel didn't feel weighed down by his past. He still had days when the pain of Sarah's betrayal resurfaced, moments when it felt like he was stuck in the same place, but those moments were becoming fewer. Slowly, he was beginning to let go of the life he had once envisioned. He didn't need Sarah to move forward, and he didn't need a perfect past to define his future. The more Daniel thought about it, the clearer it became. Rebuilding his life wasn't about forgetting his past, it was about learning from it and using that knowledge to grow. It was about understanding that even after betrayal, there was room for redemption. There was room for a new beginning. He had spent the past few months focusing on his career, his friendships, and himself. He had finally signed off on a major project at work, something he had been working toward for over a year. It was a huge milestone for him, a moment that marked a shift in how he viewed his professional life. Daniel was no longer just a man trying to heal from heartbreak. He was a man capable of achieving things he was proud of. He was capable of growth. The project at work had been all-consuming, but as things began to wind down, Daniel found himself with a little more free time. He decided to take Jake's advice and start exploring other things outside of work and his old routines. It had been a while since he had done anything just for himself, something that didn't have a deadline attached to it. He signed up for a cooking class. It was a small, casual class, held once a week in the evenings, and it felt like the kind of thing that could bring some fun and excitement back into his life. Daniel had always been someone who enjoyed food, but had never really learned how to cook beyond the basics. It was time to change that. The first class was a little awkward. Daniel walked into the cozy kitchen studio, full of unfamiliar faces, none of them looking particularly experienced in the kitchen either. He didn't know anyone, and the setting was new, but there was something liberating about it, something about stepping outside of his comfort zone that made him feel more alive. The instructor, a woman named Laura, was warm and approachable, and she quickly made everyone feel at ease. "This isn't about perfection," she said with a smile. "It's about experimenting, trying new things, and having fun. No pressure. We're all here to learn." Daniel smiled, grateful for the lighthearted tone. It was exactly what he needed. Something different. Something that wasn't weighed down by the baggage of his past. Over the next few weeks, Daniel learned how to make everything from fresh pasta to decadent desserts. It wasn't just about cooking it was about relearning how to enjoy the small things, to find pleasure in the process rather than obsessing over the outcome. Cooking gave him a sense of purpose, a tangible skill that had nothing to do with the pain he'd been carrying. One evening, after another successful cooking class, Daniel decided to call up Jake and invite him over for dinner. It was a small step, but it felt like a big one. He wanted to share what he had been learning, and he knew Jake would appreciate it. "You're making dinner?" Jake asked on the phone, sounding skeptical but amused. "All right, man. I'm intrigued. What's on the menu?" "I think I've got a few tricks up my sleeve now," Daniel replied with a chuckle. "Come over and find out." That evening, Daniel prepared a hearty Italian meal: homemade ravioli, fresh tomato sauce, and garlic bread. He even made a simple tiramisu for dessert. As he set the table, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. The meal wasn't perfect, but it was his, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he was in control of his life again. When Jake arrived, he took one look at the spread and raised an eyebrow. "All right, I'm impressed. This looks way better than I thought." Daniel laughed, feeling the familiar ease of their friendship settle in. "I've been practicing. I'm still working on my technique, but hey, it's a start." They sat down to eat, and the conversation flowed easily. They talked about work, about old memories, and about the changes in Daniel's life. He was more open than he had been in months. He talked about his time in the mountains, about what he'd learned in the process of healing, and how he was starting to build something new, something that wasn't defined by the past. "I'm proud of you, man," Jake said, taking a bite of the tiramisu. "It's good to see you like this happy, you know. You've come a long way." Daniel nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He didn't know if he would ever feel completely whole again, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was getting there. Over the following weeks, Daniel continued to make progress. His work was thriving, his social circle was growing, and he felt more confident in himself than he had in a long time. But there were still moments when the past crept up on him, moments when he would be reminded of Sarah, of the life they had shared, and of the pain she had caused him. But each time it happened, Daniel grew stronger. He wasn't defined by his past anymore. He was Daniel, and he had the power to build whatever life he wanted. One afternoon, as Daniel was walking to his car after work, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the message. It was from Sarah. "I know this may be unexpected, but I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you. I hope you're finding peace." Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment, his chest tightening. He hadn't expected to hear from her, but somehow, he knew this day would come. The message was a reminder that she was still out there, still in the world, still somewhere in his past. But Daniel didn't feel the anger or the sadness that had once overwhelmed him. Instead, he felt a strange sense of detachment. The past was the past. He had moved on. He had forgiven her in his own way, not because she deserved it, but because he deserved peace. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked to his car. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the city, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt truly free. Daniel had gotten used to the idea of moving forward. Life, though still full of uncertainties, was feeling less overwhelming. He was no longer consumed by the pain of betrayal. It no longer held him captive. Each day, he made small steps toward rebuilding himself, and for the first time in a long time, he could see a future that was his to shape, independent of the past. He had thrown himself into work, taken up new hobbies, and reconnected with friends. His sense of self was returning, piece by piece. But life, as it often did, had another challenge in store for him, one that would force him to confront not just his professional aspirations but the remnants of his past. It was a typical Wednesday when Daniel's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. At first, he thought it might be another telemarketer, but something told him to pick it up. "Hello?" Daniel said, his voice steady but curious. "Hi, is this Daniel Thomas?" the voice on the other end asked. It was a woman's voice, smooth and professional. "Yes, speaking. This is Vanessa Williams from Favoritism Solutions. I'm reaching out regarding a position we believe you'd be perfect for. We've been following your work for some time, and we were impressed with your recent project success. Would you be open to a conversation about an opportunity with us?" Daniel's curiosity piqued. Favoritism Solutions was a major player in the tech industry, a company known for cutting-edge innovations and its reputation for nurturing talent. He had heard of them, of course, but never thought they would be interested in someone like him. "Absolutely," Daniel replied, his tone shifting to one of interest. "I'd love to hear more." "Great. I'd like to set up a meeting. We're based in the city, but we can work around your schedule. How does tomorrow afternoon sound for you?" After a brief exchange, Daniel hung up the phone, feeling an unfamiliar excitement bubbling inside him. This was a big deal. Favoritism Solutions wasn't just any tech company. They were known for their forward-thinking approach to both technology and leadership. Being considered for a role with them was something that, just a few months ago, Daniel would have dreamed about. It was a reminder of what he was capable of, a step forward, in a direction he hadn't thought about in a while. But as he thought about the opportunity, something else crept into his mind, the possibility of Sarah being involved. He knew that Favoritism Solutions was a major player in the industry, and although it had been months since their breakup, the thought of her name, or even her presence, within such a big organization made his stomach churn. The next day, Daniel walked into the sleek glass building of Favoritism Solutions with a sense of both excitement and trepidation. He had dressed well, neatly pressed pants, a crisp button-down shirt, and a clean-cut appearance. He wanted to make a good impression, but he couldn't help but feel the remnants of insecurity. The building's modern design and polished floors were impressive, and as he entered the lobby, he was greeted by a friendly receptionist who ushered him to a waiting area. Daniel's thoughts swirled as he waited. He had come so far in his journey of healing, but now, with this new opportunity on the horizon, he had to wonder, was he ready for this? Could he really handle moving forward in the industry he loved while still carrying the weight of his past? Before he could get lost in his thoughts, a woman entered the lobby, smiling as she approached him. "Daniel?" she asked, her tone warm but businesslike. "Yes, that's me," Daniel replied, standing up to shake her hand. "I'm Vanessa Williams," she said with a firm handshake. "I'm really glad you could make it today. Let's head up to my office so we can discuss the position." Vanessa led him through the modern office space, and Daniel couldn't help but feel impressed by the atmosphere. The employees looked engaged, their desks lined with the latest technology, a sharp contrast to the corporate rigidity he was used to. It felt fresh, vibrant, and full of possibility. As they reached her office, Vanessa gestured for him to sit. "Thank you for meeting with me, Daniel. We've been following your work for some time, and we're really excited about the possibility of bringing you on board. But before we dive into the details of the role, I'd like to hear a bit more about your journey. We're looking for someone who not only has the technical skills but the leadership qualities to help us shape the future of the company." Daniel sat back, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. He hadn't prepared for this part of the conversation, but it didn't matter. He had already come so far, and he knew who he was now, who he had become through the challenges he had faced. This wasn't just about his career, it was about proving to himself that he was more than just a man who had been betrayed. He was someone capable of making a real difference. "I've had a lot of time to reflect recently," Daniel began. "I've always been someone who took pride in my work, but lately I've come to realize that my real strength comes from how I adapt in the face of adversity. A few months ago, my personal life was turned upside down. But instead of letting that define me, I threw myself into work, into building something meaningful. And it's helped me not only grow professionally, but personally as well. I've learned a lot about resilience and leadership." Vanessa nodded, clearly impressed. "That's exactly the kind of mindset we're looking for. We're not just looking for someone who can solve problems on a technical level. We want someone who can lead with integrity, someone who's been through the fire and come out stronger on the other side." Daniel felt a small sense of pride at her words. For so long, he had thought that the only way to succeed was by building walls around his vulnerabilities. But now, he understood that vulnerability, honesty, and growth were his true strengths. They continued discussing the role, the company's vision, and how Daniel's skills could contribute to their goals. The conversation felt natural, and by the end of the meeting, Vanessa stood up, extending her hand once more. "I think you'll be a great fit for this position, Daniel," she said, smiling. "We'll be in touch soon with next steps." Walking out of the building, Daniel felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He hadn't just nailed the interview, he had reclaimed something important: his belief in himself. He didn't need Sarah to define who he was, and he didn't need to be stuck in the past to move forward. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Jake. "How did it go?" "You've got this, man." Daniel grinned and quickly replied, "It went great. I think this is it. A new chapter." As he stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the city's skyline, Daniel realized something. He was ready. Ready for whatever came next, ready to take on the challenges of a new career, and most importantly, ready to embrace the future with open arms. It had been a week since Daniel had met with Vanessa at Favoritism Solutions, and everything was moving faster than he could have imagined. The offer had come through just 2 days after their meeting, and he had accepted it with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The position was a step up from anything he had done before, leading a team of developers on a groundbreaking new project that would change the way people interacted with technology. He was ecstatic, but at the same time, a knot of uncertainty had settled in his stomach. This wasn't just about professional growth anymore. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than just surviving. He wanted to thrive, to build something that was his, to contribute to a company that could push him to new heights. But it also meant stepping into a role where expectations were high, and the pressure would only intensify. Daniel had always been driven, but this was different. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to rebuild not only his career but his sense of purpose. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a daunting unknown. It felt like a new beginning, full of potential and possibility. But there was one thing that still lingered in the back of his mind. The past, his old relationship with Sarah, the betrayal, everything that had shattered him just months ago. Daniel's first day at Favoritism Solutions was nothing short of overwhelming. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls and an open layout that invited collaboration and innovation. The energy was palpable, and everyone seemed to be in their own world of productivity. As he sat in the orientation meeting, surrounded by the team he would soon be working with, Daniel felt the weight of the expectations on his shoulders. He wasn't just the new guy. He was the guy they had hired to lead. The pressure was real. The day flew by in a whirlwind of introductions, briefings, and team meetings. Daniel's mind raced to keep up, absorbing everything at once. But amidst the chaos of settling into his new role, something unexpected happened. During a break, as he was standing in the kitchen area getting a coffee, a familiar face walked in. It was one of his old colleagues from his previous job in San Francisco, someone he hadn't seen in over a year. "Daniel, is that you?" the man called out, a look of surprise on his face. Daniel turned, his heart skipping a beat. "Ben? Wow, what are you doing here?" Ben grinned. "I'm with Favoritism now. I'm part of the business development team." "It's crazy how small this industry is, huh?" Daniel chuckled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. Ben was a familiar face in a sea of new people, and he appreciated the comfort of their old connection. They chatted for a few minutes, catching up on old times, and Daniel learned that Ben had been with the company for a few months. He was a few years older than Daniel, someone who had been in the industry for a while, and someone Daniel had always respected. Ben's words offered a bit of reassurance. "You're going to do great here, Daniel. Favoritism is a place where they really let you take ownership of your projects. I think you'll thrive." The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and team projects. Daniel was learning to juggle his responsibilities, trying to manage the expectations of his team while also finding his own footing within the company. There were moments when he felt like he was on top of the world, and others when he wondered if he was in over his head. It wasn't easy, but he wasn't backing down. The project he was overseeing was challenging. It required not only technical expertise, but the ability to think creatively, to push boundaries, and to motivate his team. As he navigated the complexities of leading a new project, Daniel began to realize how much he had changed over the past few months. He wasn't just the guy who had been broken by a betrayal. He was the guy who had learned how to lead, how to trust himself again, and how to take risks. But there were still moments, quiet ones, when the past crept up on him. He would catch himself thinking about Sarah, about the things she had said to him that night before their relationship ended. Her voice still echoed in his mind sometimes, a whisper of doubt that made him question whether he had truly forgiven her. One night, after a particularly intense meeting with his team, Daniel found himself alone in his office, his mind buzzing with the weight of everything on his shoulders. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his concentration. It was a message from an unknown number. "Hey Daniel, it's Sarah. I know this is unexpected, but I've been thinking about you. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know I can't undo the past, but I hope you're finding peace." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. It was the second time she had reached out to him since their breakup, and once again Daniel felt his emotions twist. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many things he had never had the chance to express. But in that moment, he realized that replying wouldn't bring him peace. He had already learned to move on. He didn't need closure from Sarah to heal. He had healed on his own. With a deep breath, Daniel put the phone down. He didn't respond. The next few days passed in a haze of work and reflection. Daniel found himself increasingly invested in the project at favoritism, finding satisfaction in the small wins his team achieved. But just when things were starting to settle into a routine, the project hit a snag. One of the key components of their software, the very feature that would set their project apart, wasn't working as expected. Daniel's heart sank as he reviewed the data, his mind racing for a solution. He had a team of brilliant developers, but the pressure was mounting. The deadline was fast approaching, and they were nowhere near ready. Late one evening, as Daniel stayed at the office to troubleshoot the issue, he found himself face to face with an unexpected visitor. It was Ben, his old colleague. "Everything all right, man?" Ben asked, leaning against the doorframe of Daniel's office. He had a concerned look on his face. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Not really. We've hit a serious issue with the software, and I'm not sure how to fix it. I'm just trying to figure it out." Ben stepped into the office, his demeanor calm and steady. "You've got this, Daniel. You know what you're doing. You just need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Sometimes, when you're too close to the problem, it's hard to see the solution." Daniel appreciated Ben's perspective. "I know. It's just, everything feels like it's on my shoulders right now." Ben smiled reassuringly. "That's what being a leader is all about. You're in charge, but you don't have to do it alone. Lean on your team. Let them help you. They're capable, and they're relying on you to guide them. Trust them." Daniel took a deep breath. He hadn't realized how much he had been carrying on his own. For so long, he had thought he had to do everything himself. But now, in this moment, he understood the importance of trusting his team, of allowing himself to lean on others. "Thanks, Ben," Daniel said, finally feeling a sense of relief. "I needed to hear that." Over the next few days, Daniel took Ben's advice to heart. He worked with his team, breaking the problem down into smaller tasks, trusting his colleagues to handle parts of the issue. Slowly but surely, the software started to come together. The solution wasn't easy, but it was attainable, and together, they made it happen. As the project finally started to take shape, Daniel realized that this was what it meant to move forward. It wasn't about avoiding the pain or the obstacles. It was about facing them head-on, trusting others when necessary, and having the courage to take risks. Daniel wasn't just building a product, he was building himself, brick by brick. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Daniel felt like he was truly ready for whatever came next. The weeks following the breakthrough on the project at favoritism were some of the busiest and most rewarding of Daniel's career. The team had managed to pull everything together just in time for the presentation, and their new software was met with positive feedback from both the internal stakeholders and the clients. The pressure had been immense, but Daniel had learned an invaluable lesson in leadership. Sometimes the key to success wasn't doing everything yourself, but trusting the people around you. He had walked out of the office that evening, the weight of the past few weeks lifting off his shoulders. He felt accomplished. The project had not only saved his reputation at work, but also bolstered his confidence. For the first time in months, Daniel felt proud of what he had built. But just as things were starting to feel like they were falling into place, a familiar name appeared again on his phone screen. Sarah. This time, the message was short and to the point. "I understand if you don't want to talk, but I need you to know how truly sorry I am. I've been thinking about you and I know I've caused you pain. I just want to make things right. I hope you're doing well." The message hit Daniel harder than he expected. He had been so focused on his career, on building something new, that he hadn't allowed himself to process everything that had happened with Sarah. Her words seemed so earnest, so filled with remorse, and for a moment, Daniel found himself torn between the man he was now and the man he used to be, the man who still loved her. It had been months since they last spoke, but in the stillness of the moment, Sarah's message felt like it had reopened a wound Daniel thought had finally begun to heal. That night, as Daniel sat on his balcony looking over the city, he wrestled with his emotions. The night air was cool, and the city lights twinkled below, giving him a sense of peace. But his mind was anything but calm. He knew he had to make a decision. It wasn't just about whether or not to forgive Sarah. It was about whether he was truly ready to move forward, to close the door completely on the life they had once shared. For weeks, Daniel had felt like he was gaining control of his life again. He had invested himself in his work, in his friendships, and in new experiences, all of which had helped him heal. But the truth was, he hadn't completely let go of Sarah. Her betrayal still haunted him, and the idea of her reaching out, even after everything, stirred up emotions he had tried so hard to bury. He thought back to their last conversation, the night she confessed everything, the betrayal, the lies. He remembered the shock and heartbreak, the way the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He had felt like his whole world had fallen apart, like nothing was real anymore. He had spent so much time trying to move on, trying to rebuild. And yet, with one simple message, she had reopened that door. He knew that he had a choice. He could respond and try to find closure, or he could let it go once and for all. The answer wasn't simple. His heart was still tethered to the past in ways he wasn't ready to admit. But was he really prepared to face Sarah again, knowing that their love had been tainted? Or would reaching out to her pull him back into a toxic cycle he had spent so much time escaping? The next day, Daniel decided to meet with Jake. He needed advice, someone who knew him well enough to help him think through his emotions. Jake had been there for every difficult moment in his life, and Daniel trusted him more than anyone else. They met at their usual spot, a small cafe near Daniel's apartment. Jake was already there, sipping his coffee and flipping through a magazine. When he saw Daniel, he smiled and waved him over. "You look like you've been hit by a freight train," Jake said with a grin. "What's going on?" Daniel sat down, his mind still racing. "It's Sarah. She messaged me last night." Jake raised an eyebrow, setting the magazine down. "Sarah? Are you serious? After everything that happened?" "I know, man. I'm not sure what to do," Daniel admitted, rubbing his temples. "Part of me feels like I should just cut ties, move on. But then, I read her message. And it's like, I'm still holding on to this. I don't know if it's because I still have feelings for her, or if it's just because she's still part of my past." Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. You've come so far, Daniel. You've built something for yourself. Your life is different now, and I think you already know what you need to do." Daniel stared at him, waiting for him to continue. "Don't let her pull you back in," Jake said, his voice firm. "She messed up, big time. And you've got to remember that. Yeah, I get it. People make mistakes, and maybe she's genuinely sorry. But that doesn't mean you have to go back to her. You've worked hard to get to this place. Don't let her undo all of that." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Jake's words settle in. He had come so far. He wasn't the same man who had been consumed by pain just a few months ago. He had worked for this, he had fought for his future. And while part of him still cared for Sarah, he knew that he couldn't let her back into his life. Not now. Not when he had finally found his footing again. "I know you're right," Daniel said, his voice steady now. I don't know why it's still so hard." Jake placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Because it was real, man, and it's never easy to let go of something that meant so much. But you're stronger than this. You've got a life ahead of you, and it's time to start living it for you, not for her." Later that evening, Daniel sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. Sarah's message was still there, lingering, waiting for him to respond. He took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could feel the tug of the past, the pull of the emotions that had once defined him. But this time, he wasn't going to be dragged back into it. He typed a simple message, taking his time with each word. "I've thought about what you said. I appreciate your apology, but I've moved on. It's time for both of us to let go and start fresh. I wish you the best." He stared at the message for a moment longer, then hit send. The next morning, Daniel woke up feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The decision wasn't easy, but it was the right one. He didn't need Sarah to find happiness. He didn't need her to define who he was or who he would become. He was free. The weeks after Daniel had sent the final message to Sarah were a blur of professional success and personal growth. The decision to let go had been difficult, but it had brought with it a sense of clarity he hadn't realized he needed. The weight that had once hung over him, the nagging doubt and uncertainty of his past, was slowly being replaced with something new, something stronger. Favoritism Solutions had turned out to be everything Daniel had hoped for, and more. He had settled into his role as a team leader, overseeing a group of brilliant, driven people who were as passionate about technology as he was. The project he was leading was progressing smoothly, and it was clear that his team respected him not just for his technical expertise, but for the leadership he was learning to embrace. He was no longer the man who had been betrayed. He was the man forging a future on his own terms. Yet, as much as Daniel had focused on his career and rebuilding his life, he knew that he couldn't completely bury his emotions. The past wasn't something that could be erased. It was something that had shaped him. But he was no longer allowing it to control him. He was learning to embrace the present and the future, without the shadow of his past looming over him. One Friday afternoon, as Daniel was wrapping up a meeting with his team, his phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see it was from Lily, a friend he had met a few months ago during his time in the mountains. They had met in passing when Daniel had taken his retreat after the breakup with Sarah, and while their connection had started as just casual conversations, it had grown into something more meaningful over time. Lily was easy to talk to, someone who had experienced her own share of hardship and personal growth. There was something about her openness that made Daniel feel at ease. She had offered him a fresh perspective on life and love, and they had kept in touch ever since. "Hey Daniel, I've been thinking about you. I know you're super busy, but would you like to grab coffee this weekend? I'd love to catch up." Daniel smiled at the message. He hadn't seen Lily in person for a while, and the idea of meeting up with her was more than just appealing. It felt like the right step. He had spent months healing, focusing on his career, and distancing himself from the past. He hadn't fully allowed himself to open up to anyone since the end of his relationship with Sarah. But Lily felt different. She wasn't a rebound or someone to replace the past. She was simply someone who saw him for who he was now, not who he used to be. "I'd love that. How about Saturday afternoon?" Daniel replied. Saturday arrived, and Daniel found himself at the same cafe where he had met Lily months ago. The place had become a small part of his routine, somewhere he had come to associate with peace and new beginnings. When Lily walked in, he saw her smile instantly, and it felt like the weight of the past year had been lifted off his shoulders. "Daniel," she said, her eyes lighting up as she approached. "It's so good to see you." "You too," Daniel said, standing up to greet her. "It's been too long." They both sat down, and for a moment the world outside seemed to disappear. Lily ordered a coffee, and Daniel followed suit. As they talked about their lives, their work, and the small updates that had filled the gaps between their last conversation, Daniel felt a calmness settle over him. She was easy to talk to, and the conversation flowed naturally. Lily was the first to bring up the elephant in the room. "So, how are you really doing? I know we've talked a lot about work, but what about you? How's everything, personally?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. His past with Sarah still lingered, but he wasn't the same person he was when he had met Lily. He had grown. He had learned. "I've been doing a lot better," Daniel said, looking down at his coffee. "I've been focusing on work and really diving into what I want from life. I still have my moments, but I think I'm finally starting to heal." Lily nodded, her gaze warm and understanding. "Healing takes time, but you're getting there. I'm glad to hear that. You deserve peace." Her words resonated deeply with Daniel. He had been fighting for peace for so long, not just in his career but in his heart. And now, as he sat across from Lily, he realized that he was no longer fighting. He had found it. As the afternoon went on, Daniel found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in months. He shared the struggles he had faced since his breakup with Sarah, the pain of betrayal, and the journey he had been on to rebuild himself. Lily listened without judgment, offering her thoughts and advice when needed. But more than anything, she gave him the space to express his feelings. When they finished their coffee, they decided to take a walk around the park. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with a soft breeze that made the trees sway gently. It was the kind of day that made everything feel right. Daniel said as they walked, "I've spent so much time focusing on fixing myself, on moving forward, that I didn't realize what I was missing." "What do you mean?" Lily asked, looking up at him. "I was so focused on healing that I forgot to really live. I got caught up in the pain of what I lost, and I didn't make space for what could still be. I spent so much time trying to fill the void from my past that I forgot there's room for something new." Lily smiled softly. "You don't have to do everything on your own, Daniel. Sometimes it's okay to let other people in. Sometimes the right person is there to help you find the way." Daniel stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. His heart skipped a beat as he looked into her eyes. There was something comforting about her presence, something that felt like the future, not the past. "I think I'm ready to let someone in again," Daniel said, his voice steady but vulnerable. Lily smiled, her eyes bright with understanding. "Then I think you're more ready than you realize." The next few months were filled with new experiences and deeper connections. Daniel continued to thrive at Fiverton Solutions, his career progressing as he led new projects and expanded his influence within the company. He felt proud of the work he was doing, but he also felt like there was more to life than just work. He continued to grow closer to Lily, exploring a connection that had become something more than friendship. They spent time together on weekends, hiking, cooking, and simply enjoying each other's company. Daniel no longer feared the idea of being vulnerable with someone. He had learned that trust was not a weakness, but a strength. As the seasons changed, so did Daniel. He was no longer the man who had been broken by betrayal. He was a man who had learned to rise from the ashes, stronger and more confident than ever before. The past was still a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He was free,